My name is Abigail. I am 25 years old. Yesterday marked a significant milestone in my life as I married my partner of 4 years in an intimate backyard wedding, coinciding with our 4th anniversary. Despite the small scale of the event, the significance of the date made rescheduling impossible. Everything from interior design assistant to server had been arranged, highlighting the impracticality of postponement. The shadow over this joyous occasion was cast by my father's absence. Initially, he cited a medical emergency, but under pressure, he revealed the true reason. He had opted to attend a camping trip organized by my brother, who visits only a few weeks each year. My father's decision was a clear choice of prioritizing time with my brother over my wedding day. He had even suggested that rescheduling my wedding would be a simple matter of notifying a few guests and vendors, a suggestion I found dismissive of the importance of this day to me. I had my stepdad walk me down the aisle, a decision that became emotionally charged when my father arrived after the ceremony. He was moved to tears by the wedding photos, realizing the gravity of what he had missed. His emotional response led to a heart-wrenching conversation between us, culminating in his plea for a second ceremony to make amends. This situation has left me in turmoil, feeling both saddened by his initial decision and the subsequent emotional fallout. This narrative captures the bittersweetness of a day that should have been solely filled with joy, but was instead tinged with familial conflict. The dynamics of preference and priority within my family were laid bare, underscoring the complexity of familial relationships and the profound impact of seemingly straightforward choices. Growing up, I often found myself battling feelings of jealousy towards my brother. Despite my best efforts, I struggled to feel genuinely happy for him because of his behavior. He had a pronounced sense of self-importance and a brash attitude, likely amplified by the constant attention he received. His skills in various areas only fed into his arrogance, and he often behaved as though he was a gift to the world. This made him quite difficult to get along with, and he didn't hesitate to bully me. Our relationship was so strained that when he finally left for college, I felt a sense of relief. Our family dynamics were further complicated when my parents divorced during my middle school years. The split was triggered by my mother's affair with a college friend, leading to a particularly bitter and contentious separation. Despite the challenges, my father agreed to a shared custody arrangement. The divorce didn't come as a complete surprise, as the tension between my parents had been palpable for years. Even during seemingly happy times, their unhappiness was evident. They would put on a facade of joy during public appearances and holidays, but at home, they barely communicated and slept in separate rooms. It seemed they had stayed together out of obligation rather than affection. The situation at home worsened when my father began drinking more heavily, coinciding with escalating fights between my parents. One day, my mother disclosed her affair and moved out, though she attempted to keep in touch with us kids. I responded to her efforts, unlike my brother, who couldn't bring himself to forgive her. His close bond with our father made his stance understandable if not predictable. As we grew older, my relationship with my father became strained, particularly after I chose to maintain a friendly relationship with my mother and my stepdad. This seemed to alienate me further from my father, who perhaps expected me to side completely with him, as my brother had. This created a rift between us, leaving our interactions distant and strained. My brother's approach was to openly criticize our mother and her new husband, aligning closely with our father's feelings, while I chose a different path, seeking to keep peace with both sides of my family. A few months after my parents' divorce was finalized, I found myself dressed as a bridesmaid at my mother's wedding. My brother, on the other hand, chose not to attend. Despite his feelings, he was still obligated to spend half the month with our mother due to the custody arrangement, which he bitterly resented. Unlike my father, our mother treated us equally, and my brother struggled with not being the favored child, often acting out in response. My father, believing that my mother and her new husband were mistreating my brother, made several attempts to gain full custody of us. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, as his claims lacked substantial evidence. I was relieved by this because my mother showed genuine care for me, and my stepfather was a kind and decent man. As a young child, I was initially conflicted about my mother's actions, Her affair had ended her marriage to my father. But over time, I chose to prioritize my happiness, which meant maintaining a good relationship with her. This decision proved valuable, especially after we lost her to cancer 4 years ago. I cherish the time we spent together, appreciating her unwavering love as a mother, despite the complexities of her personal life. In her final days, my brother scarcely visited, but he made an effort to be there for her towards the end, which I think brought her some comfort. After my mother passed, my stepfather moved out of state, though we stayed in contact. A year later, my brother relocated to London for a job, returning annually to visit our father. Our communication dwindled to nothing, but the dynamics within our family began to shift, particularly between my father and me. My father apologized for his distant behavior following the divorce, recognizing that he had felt betrayed and hurt. He admitted to favoring my brother, which had strained our relationship. We agreed to work on improving our bond, and to my surprise, over the past few years, our relationship genuinely began to heal. This change was so profound that I asked him to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, to which he agreed. While I knew my father still held a special place in his heart for my brother, he showed me love and care, confirming his commitment to our improved relationship. However, a recent event made me realize that he might never fully see me in the light I hoped for as his daughter. Despite this, I remain hopeful and committed to the progress we've made, cherishing the familial bonds that have strengthened over time. I had always felt like a secondary concern to my dad, especially when my brother was around. My father only made an effort with me after my brother moved to London, visiting just a few weeks each year. It seemed like I mattered only in my brother's absence, and even this illusion shattered with a recent incident. My dad asked me to postpone my wedding for a camping trip with my brother. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, and immediately after hanging up with him, I called my stepdad to ask him to walk me down the aisle instead. My reaction was driven by hurt and a desire for revenge, but at the moment, it felt justified. My stepdad had been a supportive presence during my mom's funeral, and although we weren't in regular touch, our bond was strong. He hesitated initially, knowing my father would also be at the wedding, but eventually he agreed. As the wedding day approached, my dad became increasingly distant, clearly preoccupied now that my brother was back in town. On the day of the wedding, my father was absent, which was painful yet expected. I held a faint hope for him to appear last minute, but that didn't happen. Instead, my stepdad proudly walked me down the aisle, a moment both joyous and bitter for me. Despite the joy of my wedding day, I sent my dad a photo of the ceremony, a picture captured by my cousin showing my stepdad walking me down the aisle. I hoped to evoke a reaction, but there was silence until the evening when my wedding was winding down. That's when my dad unexpectedly appeared, exhausted but apologetic, admitting he regretted not prioritizing my wedding. He suggested holding another ceremony the next day, an offer that left me conflicted but hopeful for a new beginning in our relationship. He wanted to make it up to me to be there to walk his daughter down the aisle. He admitted he had been thoughtless when he chose to go camping instead of attending my wedding, a decision that led me to reschedule my special day. Although he was sorry and longed for another chance to make things right, he stressed that it wouldn't matter to him if no one else attended. He simply wanted to experience walking me down the aisle. This desire seemed born from desperation, and it troubled me. Reflecting on it, I realized his regret might not have been as deep if I hadn't asked my stepdad to step in. When I questioned him about it, his hesitation revealed the truth. It seemed his sudden interest was more about outshining my stepdad than genuinely caring for me. Disappointed, I told him I wouldn't organize another wedding just for his benefit. He had missed his chance, and I sought tranquility away from his drama. He broke down, tearfully apologizing, claiming he hadn't realized the gravity of the situation until he saw the wedding photos. He pleaded for forgiveness, saying he and my brother had rushed back as soon as they could. Despite his pleas, I stood firm, wanting to savor my wedding day. Offended, he accused me of being heartless. His reaction only fueled my resolve as I recounted the times he had let me down before without any real reason. This time, I had enough reasons, and his current plight seemed a just consequence of his actions. I asserted that my stepdad, though not my blood relative, genuinely cared for me, contrasting sharply with his performative affection. As I retreated into my home, leaving him outside in his sorrow, my father and brother eventually departed. Time has passed since that day, and although part of me feels remorseful for the harsh words and his tears, I find solace in knowing that my stepdad's presence at my wedding was a decision made out of genuine care and love. The situation arose because my father chose to reschedule my wedding so that he could take a camping trip with my brother. Throughout my life, I've consistently made excuses for his actions, but I've reached my limit. His behavior is inexcusable, and I'm not obligated to forgive him. Admittedly, it was tough to see him upset, but everyone has their breaking point. I've endured his unfair treatment silently for years, never letting him or anyone else see the tears he caused during my childhood and adolescence. I doubt he would change his ways even if he knew the pain he caused, so I feel justified in my decision to cease contact. I've discussed this decision with my husband, who supports my stance but wanted the choice to be wholly mine. I also spoke with my stepdad, fearing I had inadvertently used him as a pawn in my issues with my dad. He reassured me, understanding my actions and acknowledging our strong relationship, which comforts me. To those concerned about my use of my relationship with my stepdad, he has expressed no issues with it, which puts my mind at ease. It's been a few days post-wedding, and although my father has attempted to reach out multiple times, I've chosen not to respond. I am unaware of the contents of his messages and prefer to keep it that way. Especially with my honeymoon approaching, I want to focus on this new chapter without distractions. Tomorrow, my husband and I leave for our honeymoon. This morning, I ignored a call from my dad but later briefly considered checking his messages. However, I decided against it, choosing to maintain my peace as we embark on this special journey. My father had been calling me daily since my wedding. Despite the varying times of his calls, I hadn't looked at his messages until today. Upon reviewing them, I realized they all conveyed the same sentiment in different words. He was apologetic and eager to mend our relationship. He expressed regret for not being the best father and pleaded for another chance to make things right. He also admitted that my grievances were justified, acknowledging that he had favored my brother over the years and understood why I was upset. As his only remaining biological child, he expressed a strong desire to remain a part of my life and was prepared to do whatever necessary to gain my forgiveness. Reading these heartfelt messages was deeply saddening due to the complex emotions involved. However, I had already decided I needed some distance from him. Thus, after reading, I called him back. He answered immediately, starting to apologize again, but I interrupted to inform him that I was about to leave for my honeymoon. I asked him to stop calling and texting for a while, explaining that his continual apologies wouldn't change the past and only served to keep the pain fresh in my mind. I made it clear that I would reach out to him when I was ready to reconnect, but until then, he needed to refrain from contacting me. He managed to hide any hurt from his voice, understandingly agreeing to wait for my call. With that settled, I'm now looking forward to the peace and joy of my upcoming honeymoon. I am currently enjoying the third day of my honeymoon. Fortunately, my father has kept his promise not to contact me, which has been a relief. However, this morning brought an unexpected interruption from another family member, my brother. He called me from an unknown number, which turned out to be a burner phone, catching me off guard. Initially, I was prepared to end the call as soon as I recognized his voice, but he quickly addressed that he knew I would want to hang up. He accused me of being an escapist, which, frustratingly, made me stay on the line. During the call, he lectured me on the importance of family and criticized how I have been treating our father, demanding an apology from me. He argued that no matter my feelings, our father would always be a part of my life, and my stepfather could not replace him. His words seemed unnecessary and out of place, as if we were children again, choosing sides in their divorce. I tried to explain that this was a matter between our father and myself, not the entire family. Yet, he insisted it involved everyone because my actions had supposedly ruined his visit and cut short a family camping trip, making everyone miserable. He even went as far as to claim I was acting out of jealousy towards him, a baseless accusation that only highlighted his immaturity. I responded by telling him that his behavior was typical of someone who refuses to grow up. I made it clear that I harbored no jealousy towards him. In fact, I felt pity because, despite his professional success, he seemed unable to move past our childhood dynamics. This conversation only reinforced my decision to maintain distance from such a toxic environment, at least for the duration of my honeymoon. Despite his achievements, he remained emotionally immature, ensuring his perpetual state of misery and unlikability. Before he could retort to my accusations, I cut him off, explaining that any argument from his side would only validate my observations about his miserable demeanor. I then promptly ended the call, which, admittedly, brought me a peculiar sense of satisfaction. Reflecting on it, perhaps I shouldn't have engaged with him at all, but it did feel like I reclaimed some control. Recently, I returned from my honeymoon, still basking in the remnants of vacation bliss until reality beckoned us back. My husband resumed work, and so did I, signaling our reintegration into our routine lives. With this shift, I felt it was time to address long-standing issues with my father. After work, I visited him, surprising him and my brother, who was also present. Choosing to overlook my brother's presence due to his habitual interference, I requested a private conversation with my father, a setup he reluctantly agreed to after some insistence. Alone with him, I expressed my profound disappointment in his recent actions. Over the past few years, our relationship had seen significant improvement, which is why I had initially asked him to walk me down the aisle. However, his request to reschedule the event made his priorities clear, prompting me to turn to my stepdad instead, whose significance in my life, though different, is no less important. I confessed to my father that I was unsure if his absence on my wedding day was due to a sense of competition with my stepdad or some other reason. This confrontation, though difficult, was necessary as it highlighted unresolved tensions and the need for clear communication moving forward, setting the stage for potential reconciliation or a redefinition of our relationship. He expressed deep regret for missing my wedding, but I reassured him that dwelling on the past wouldn't help. He was visibly upset until I suggested that we could try starting anew. Despite others' expectations that I might sever ties with him permanently, I didn't see that as a realistic or desired outcome. Having lost my mother to cancer, I've learned how abruptly life can take our loved ones away. Although my father's actions in the past, and even recently, have been far from perfect, I cherish the good moments we shared. However, I cannot completely overlook the challenging times either. So, I reached a point of acceptance and told him that I was open to giving him a chance to amend his mistakes. But for now, I needed him to respect my space as I took time to heal, which might take weeks, months, or even years. I explained that once I felt more positive about our relationship, we could attempt to rebuild our father-daughter connection. Until that point, I preferred to keep our interactions minimal. He understood and asked if he could hug me before I left. We shared a brief, emotional embrace. I managed to hold back my tears until I was alone in my car.